Now that you have an insight into my history as a gamer, well, you should if you watch the video. Go and watch it now. It's time to discuss what we came here to discuss. Why isn't gaming fun anymore? Just a quick disclaimer, this isn't complete gospel. I'm not really a huge gaming expert, but I've sourced most of my claims with extensive research. Check out the sources, find some more. Hold up. Something wrong with this image. It isn't representative of my prime demographic of viewer. Give me a moment. Check out the sources, find some more, and then come to your own conclusions. The points that I make aren't really solid facts per se, rather they're a mixture of observations and opinions based on research and life experiences. Anyway, enough rambling, let's get on with this. 1. Games are unoriginal. Have you ever noticed most new games have a number after the name? Or are at least a sequel or part of a game series? If you haven't noticed it because you live under a rock located in a cave in the middle of Antarctica, let's observe. Rockstar has produced 7 GTA games. Pokemon has 18 games from the original series, and that's not even counting the remakes or spin-offs. Nintendo has created over 140 different Mario games since its first in 1981. But the most iconic example of a game development company milking the franchise cash cow to death is none other than Call of Duty. Call of Duty, or COD as it's known, is an FPS franchise created in 2003 by Infinity Ward. Nowadays, various development companies such as Treyarch, Infinity Ward, Amaze, Grey Matter, Sledgehammer. Honestly, it doesn't matter who makes them. They're all pretty much the same game. But the publisher has stayed the same. Activision. There has been something like 48 COD games all in all, with 21 of them being from the original series. This number is probably greater than the numbers of any troops in any COD campaign division. The numbers have been disputed by various sources, some saying that there has been as little as 16 COD games from the main franchise and 42 games overall. But I think the fact that they dispute what counts as a COD game is a testament to just the sheer number of the bloody things. Pop quiz time! Yay. Don't worry, it'll be fun. Which conflict was the original Call of Duty game based off of? Is it A, World War I, B, the Cold War, C, World War II, or D, the Clone Wars? I'll give you as much time as you're willing to pause. Anyway, the answer is C, of course. I mean, is there a more interesting conflict technologically than the Second World War? Probably, but if you didn't guess World War II, I'm not super surprised. Though you'd have to be dumb as f*** to have guessed the Clone Wars. Here's the second question. Yes, I'm gonna be that guy. That old as f*** substitute teacher that is so strict, he'll force you to stand in a line for half an hour for no reason, and he'll make the whole lesson about the Vietnam War if asked. Okay, fine, this will be the last question. And I promise. Which Call of Duty game came out in 2013? Anybody know? Any die-hard COD fans subscribed to me? Well, the answer is Call of Duty Ghosts. Why do I consider the sheer number of COD games to be problematic for Activision? The original game was released in 2003 after all, so why not refresh the franchise once in a while by producing new games? The problem is they release a new COD game once every year. Pretty much the exact same game, but with different graphics and a new story. Let's explore the typical COD game. First, we shall look at the single player. With the exception of a naughty few, all of the COD games have a campaign. They may vary by place and time, but they all follow a similar storyline. You play as either a new recruit or a somewhat young and mildly seasoned soldier, ranked private or sergeant. You are part of a division of soldiers whose mission is vital for the success of the war you're partaking in. The enemy can be seen committing disgusting atrocities against your troops if you begin in a disadvantageous position. As you go forth into the campaign, you witness firsthand the brutality of war. Sometimes you may even grow close to a comrade or an animal. Then, tragedy strikes. Hey guys, so it's post-production Mike here at the moment. Well, I may have made a mistake. Turns out the dog didn't actually die. I mean, I don't know what bullets the enemy was using. They must have been using Nerf darts or something. Neither did Zussman. The point I was making is they want to have that, like, shock factor of one of your best friends almost dying. That kind of generic thing. I've seen this excessively in FPS games, most notably the Far Cry series. In the beginning of a Far Cry game, a friend will be killed by the enemy. In Far Cry 3, it's Jason's brother Grant. In Far Cry 4, it's Darpan. The main lesson being that war is never glamorous. There is no romanticising how cruel it can be. You will be forced to witness unspeakable acts. Sometimes it might be your own countrymen that are committing these acts. War is truly awful. According to Hody Johns, the average COD campaign lasts for 7 hours, with the shortest being Black Ops Cold War at only 5.5 hours. I could blink and that campaign would be over, it's that quick. The longest COD campaign is Black Ops 4 at 9.5 hours, and it's not even a campaign. Not really, anyway. I can't make these conclusions from experience alone, but they must be similar enough for the player base to be gradually losing interest in the campaigns. According to Kyle Orland, the completion rate of a single-player COD campaign has been slowly declining from an average of just over 50% to 30 to 20% in a few years alone. The campaign for Black Ops 3 has only been completed by 9% of Steam users, which is pathetic if I'm being quite honest, but I'm the virgin single-player gamer, not the Chad multiplayer warrior. These statistics show that most players choose to exclusively partake in the multiplayer side of Call of Duty. But what is that like? I'm not really qualified to answer that question, so I did a little digging and discovered all the game modes in the COD franchise. In most COD games, the fundamental game modes consist of free-for-all, team deathmatch, king of the hill, search and destroy, capture the flag, and domination. While these game modes are basic necessities for an enjoyable multiplayer session, I can't help but question what they actually changed in each new installment of the franchise. Occasionally, you get an iconic game mode like Gun Game, but not much really changes. You must kill as many enemies as possible, or capture a strategic point. But is there really much that can be changed? I'd like to think so, but it would take time and effort. So my basic solution would be to stop churning the games out once a year, and focus on quality rather than quantity. But instead, they do the opposite. It must feel like instead of getting a new game, you're merely downloading a texture pack with a slightly different campaign, and maybe a few new game modes or guns. This isn't a phenomenon exclusive to COD. Almost all AAA game developers follow a similar pattern. It's like their overlords have written a gaming bible that lays the groundworks out for every modern game. Mediocre campaign with an AI that's just copy-paste programming? Check. Multiplayer game modes that are tried and true, but unambitious and too safe? Check. Graphics hailed as revolutionary, but truthfully are glitchy as Motherfucking check. This has led to a phenomenon I have observed, which I call the COD effect. It doesn't only apply to COD. It can apply to any AAA game franchise. Star Wars Battlefront, Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Battlefield, the list goes on. Basically, each year, a new AAA game is released. Previously, it had been hyped up as being the greatest game in the series at a convention like E3. Celebrities are called in, streamers overreact to the game's trailer, game journalists are given access to only the best aspects of the game. The whole shabam. Then the game comes out and every fan plays it. They'll only play it for an average of a month or two. Maybe a year at most. Worst case scenario, the player base is extremely disappointed and the backlash ensues. Then some irrelevant motherfucker like Merc Music will come along and create a video looking back on the game titled RIP Game Name or Goodbye Game Name. Why can't we have modern games with loads of replay value? Do they want you to buy as many of their games as possible? Or is it just the easiest way to develop games? After all, as Bennett Foddy said in his game,
why make something demanding if it just gets piled up in the landfill, filed in with the bland things?
It's a sad state of affairs. The short answer? Development companies keep churning out the same game with a few small tweaks. This is bad in the long term because when the formula is as overused as this one, it inevitably becomes stale. 2. Games have become cash cows. Oh boy, this is going to be a long one. Any veteran gamers here played Civ 5? Well, in the late game, there's a quote by Trip Hawkins after you research a tech. It goes something like this.
There's a basic principle about consumer electronics. It gets more powerful all the time, and it gets cheaper all the time.
If this quote sums up the 21st century, you'd think games would be gradually becoming better and cheaper too, right? Wrong. If anything, the opposite has been occurring. So much for holding up your end of the bargain, Trip. Imagine being the founder of a company with the constant reputation for being America's worst company due to alleged greed and shocking treatment of employees. America's. The country full of fat, incestuous rednecks that'll defend free market capitalism and the corporate greed that inevitably comes with it to the death. Observe. Half-Life 2, one of Valve's most innovative and excellent games of the mid-2000s. How much does it cost today? $14.50. The same can be said for its sandbox counterpart, Gary's Mod. What about other older games? Minecraft? $30 for an amazing childhood experience, exploring many worlds and building countless structures. Terraria? $14.25, which is incredible for the replay value it offers. In fact, it's the only game I've played for over 1,000 hours, which is an achievement in itself. But what if you want an introduction to grand strategy? Well, Victoria 2 costs $28.95, which is quite the value for money when you compare it to its successor, which costs almost $70. Speak of the devil. What is the price of a AAA game? Look no further than the 2015 Call of Duty game Black Ops 3. $89.95 to $135.99. For what? A generic COD game? There's a reason I bought Black Ops 2 for Oh. Wait. Well, I meant to say World at War for $30, which offers most of, if not all of what the COD series has to offer, plus an iconic zombies game mode with multiple maps. Another game that costs a butt ton is Harvestella, $89.95. Are you kidding me? The game might be pretty good, I don't know, I haven't played it. But that's around 5 hours of pay, and that's if you work where I used to work. Why would I pay that much money when I can just play Stardew Valley? A game with lots of replay value that only costs $16.99. And if you don't enjoy NES graphics, you can play Slime Rancher for $28.95, though personally it's not my cup of tea. And remember the sequel to Victoria 2, creatively titled Victoria 3? You know how I said it costs $70? Well, that's just for the plebs. The Grand Edition costs $114.95. For what? What much more can you get in Victoria 3 that you don't get in Vic 2? Granted, newer games have a lot more invested into them by these companies. They require a lot more space on a computer and have much better graphics. But I can't help but think the companies could better delegate their resources. More on that later. But the base price of games is only the absolute tip of the Mount Everest-sized iceberg, which consists of toxic radioactive water that puts Flint's water supply to shame. Remember Star Wars Battlefront 2? No, not that one. The latest edition, developed by DICE and published by Electronic Arts. Yeah, that one. In 2017, one of gaming's biggest shitfests occurred. Initially, EA and DICE championed the idea of the game being given free updates with no DLC or season passes. But scrutiny was already being applied months before the official launch. In the test version, players noticed a new system. Well, it's not that new. In fact, I'm surprised they didn't call the game devs out on this practice ages ago. Loot crates. What are loot crates, you might be asking if you're not a gamer or if you're just stupid. Loot crates contain items which are both cosmetic and practical for the progression of your character. The problem with this system in Battlefront 2 is the randomness and importance to improving your character. In these loot crates were star cards. Star cards were essential to upgrading certain aspects of your character, such as weapon damage or health regen. There were 4 different tiers of star card: common, uncommon, rare, and epic. Guess how you can easily obtain the rare and epic ones? By purchasing better quality loot crates. And how did you purchase loot crates? By using crystals, which can be purchased for IRL money. Basically, those that could afford to could purchase lots of crystals to invest in loot crates, speeding up the progression of your character significantly. Pay to win, in a nutshell. Not only that, but the heroes you could play as, such as Darth Vader or Luke Skywalker, could take up to 40 hours of gameplay and saving up in-game currency to unlock. 60,000 credits for just one hero. Once the gaming community kicked up a stink, what did EA do? Well, they posted one of their generic bullshit corporate PR comments in response to an angry Redditor. They talked about how the system supposedly made the game fair and gave you a sense of achievement. Yeah, I achieved plenty by paying some greedy $500 for a ton of star cards. What a great work ethic. Well, that comment went down as well as you'd expect. It became the most downvoted comment in the entirety of Reddit's extensive history. Personally, if you ask me, I think Reddit is the worst website on the internet. It genuinely makes me want to kill myself. Disclaimer, these are only my opinions of Reddit, and if you enjoy it, then fine. Hang on, why am I defending Reddit? Who gives a shit about my opinions of the site? I have a more important message. Suicide is never okay. If you feel alone and hopeless in life, know that every second you choose to stay alive, a light grows brighter within you. It shines around the people that love you, that care about you, giving others in your position hope for a better tomorrow. You are not alone in your struggles. Everybody struggles one way or another. Giving up lets those who rely on hatred and negativity to maintain their power win. Don't let them win. Never give up. But that's going off topic. Long story short, Star Wars Battlefront 2 was pay to win, with loads of loot crates and microtransactions. The loot crates were so bad, a variety of governments decided to investigate. Many of them considered them to constitute a form of gambling. The most notorious example was when the Belgian Gaming Commission found that loot boxes in games such as Star Wars Battlefront 2 were in violation of their gambling legislation. The punishment for violating said legislation is a fine of $800,000 and up to 5 years in prison. Of course, EA denies that they were in violation of the law. Some people like to claim that loot boxes are illegal in Belgium, but it's more complicated than that. This kind of reaction is not unique to Belgium. The Netherlands also had a similar finding in 2018. The legality of loot boxes there is determined by the real-life value of the contents in the crate and its ability to be traded outside the game. In some countries like China and South Korea, the rewards and the probabilities of receiving said rewards must be disclosed as accurately as possible to the player. Furthermore, China has placed a cap on how many loot boxes a player can open in a day. The Japanese government has gone so far as to ban complete gacha, which is loot boxes, but the content in them is random and completely necessary for the progression. The UK has taken a more laissez-faire approach, leaving it up to the companies and the likes of Peggy to regulate themselves, all while still admonishing it and taking the moral high ground. The US? Well... I can elaborate much more on this incident, but the script is already 5.5 pages long, so I'll dumb it down a bit. Hey, since I put so much effort into my videos, why don't you subscribe? I'm on the road to 1,000 in order to get partnered with YouTube and actually make money from this venture. Don't forget to press the notification bell too, it would mean the world to me. Long story short, EA pulled these microtransactions from the game, and all is good and dandy, right? Wrong! Because a newer game managed to implement a monetization system that made people actually miss the loot crate system. You can tell it's a dog system when people miss loot crates. Battle passes. In 2022, Blizzard released Overwatch 2 to a mixed audience reaction. Why was it mixed? People didn't like the Battle Pass system. The Battle Pass is a tiered system which requires you to play the game extensively to unlock the rewards of each tier. There are usually two types of Battle Pass, the free version and the premium version. Guess which one has the better rewards and gives its users a distinct advantage? Nowadays, games use two different methods of monetization, DLC and microtransactions. Some people argue these are the same thing, but I have a more concrete means of defining them. Microtransactions are small exchanges in-game involving real-life money in which the player pays a certain amount for either in-game currency or a skin, weapon, or loot crate that is already implemented into the game but lay behind a paywall. The most infamous example being the Star Wars Battlefront 2 controversy that I explained. EA also uses it in their FIFA series. I just play AFL Evolution 2 anyway. I mean, the game's no longer up for sale, but I still have it, so, you know, why not? Want to create a dream footy team? Crips? The Bont? Warper? Just add them to your custom team. No payment necessary. The games themselves may not have been the greatest, but respect to Wicked Witch for not monetizing it to death. The main defining factor for me, which differentiates microtransactions from DLCs, is in its implementation into the game. Some sources disagree with me on this, so take my opinion for a grain of salt if you really want to. DLC, which stands for downloadable content, is exactly what it says on the tin. It's additional content created by developers as an addition to the game, which players can download onto the base game. These can include a new map, campaign, game mechanics, etc. DLCs are not initially included in the base game. That is the primary difference. In fact, some DLCs can be free. Most games nowadays have DLCs in them one way or another, but the amount of DLC can vary. Games like Prey usually have one major DLC at most, with a payment option to download the OST. And then you have the case of Europa Universalis 4. Paradox Interactive is a publishing company that was founded in 2004 and operates in a variety of countries, including Sweden, the United States, France, Finland, the Netherlands, and Spain. They have published over 100 game titles. Their largest game, apart from Hoi 4, is a Renaissance-era game called Europa Universalis 4. This game is infamous for the overwhelmingly large number of DLCs, but is it really that bad? I did the maths for you so you don't have to. Check out the sources in the description. Overall, there are a total of 67 DLCs according to EU4's Steam DLC page. You could create an army of DLC that could overrun Capitol Hill with that number. Okay, it would be a bit of a stretch, but still, only 3 of them are free. Taking that into account, the combined price of all DLCs is 614 Australian dollars. To put that into perspective, at my old job, my pay for 1 week's work was $890 approximately, and that was after tax. Yeah, you can see why so many of Paradox's fans were pissed. The mean average, if you include all the cheaper packs, such as music or army outfits for certain nations, is $9.50 per DLC, but this skyrockets to $22 per DLC if you only include the expansions and immersion packs. You know, the packs that actually add something into the game, gameplay-wise. Which would you rather purchase? Cuphead, which is $29 but an entire game, or Leviathan, a DLC worth the same amount that only really adds a couple of new mechanics and focus tree? I know I would choose Cuphead. Oh. Of course I have. Moving on, EU4 isn't the only Paradox game guilty of this. Their most famous World War II grand strategy game, Hearts of Iron 4, has 18 DLCs worth $267 with a mean average of $23.50. Their space civilization game Stellaris has 20 DLCs worth $345 with a mean price of $17.25. Keep in mind, I got so tired doing the maths, I didn't bother with only including expansions for Stellaris. Yeah, I'm lazy, I know. So you can't afford to purchase the DLCs. What happens? From experience, you get a bare bones game which puts you at a disadvantage. What can you do about it? You can pay a moderate subscription fee to Paradox for access to all the DLCs. It's here where I discovered something truly disgusting. The subscriptions only apply for one game, not all of them, just one, and they cost the exact same amount per month, $7.50, which isn't horrible, unless you're buying the Hoi 4 subscription. Hoi 4 has 18 DLCs, and their subscription service costs the exact same as EU4's 67 DLC service. How the hell has the community not noticed this? Most of Paradox's recent titles have the reputation of being bare bones. There's much speculation as to why this may be the case, but some say it's their attempt to justify the large number of DLCs in their titles. Either way, their base games are hardly a joy to play. Next. 3. Game development companies are run poorly. I just wanted to quickly preface this by saying most of the incidents I describe are allegations, which have been made by certain parties against others. I cannot stress this enough. I'm not saying the allegations are true, nor am I implying that this is the case. That is for the respective legal systems of the countries involved to decide. Since most of us are probably nerds, we should all know how the supply and demand principle works, right? Right? Maybe I overestimate the intelligence of humanity. In a nutshell, if a commodity, product, service, you name it, if it's rare and the demand is high, its price will inevitably rise. That and vice versa. An example of this principle is gold, or anything considering how bad the cost of living has become in Australia. So what happens when loads of naive, dumb children play video games and learn they can make a living off creating said games? They start to fantasize about creating games that best reflect their own vision of the ideal game. But as we all know, kids are stupid. Unfortunately, this is seldom how the game development industry functions, especially for the famous franchises that kids grow up idolizing. This fantasy creates an excess of adults who believe working in the game industry is a dream come true. It also creates an excessive labour pool for AAA companies such as Electronic Arts, Epic Games, and Activision Blizzard to exploit. And if the articles in my research are to be believed, exploit it they do. In Activision, for example, employees alleged there was an extremely toxic workplace environment where working unpaid overtime was an expectation. 12-hour days, 6 days a week are commonplace. Yet the pay is so inadequate, employees can't afford to take any time off the job without suffering severe financial stress. Furthermore, employees of departments such as QA are contracted, meaning there is no guarantee for secure long-term work. If they act in a dissenting manner, they won't have their contracts renewed. These experiences are not exclusive to Activision. In 2018, the video game Fortnite blew up. This phenomenon was unprecedented for the development company behind the game, Epic Games. The resulting reaction from the executives, according to anonymous sources, can be considered draconian. Stories of 100-hour work weeks, periods of intense work, insufferable crunches, no time off, weekend work, and a culture of fear litter the internet more than the Great Pacific Garbage Patch litters, well, the Pacific. One worker described his life during this period as being unable to sleep, being constantly grumpy, and having no energy to go out. Some suffered health issues as a result of the huge workload. I'm not at liberty to say whether these allegations are true or not, but if they are, it's a disgrace to the industry. In my opinion, it shows an upper management and executive team with a lack of vision and understanding about how to get work properly done. When I read one of these articles, a quote from Tommy Miller, a veteran of the industry for over 17 years, came to mind. The ironic thing is, you end up working less because you are overworked. Productivity has a weird way of working like that. Before we move on to the next point, I feel it is a must that I point out some of the disgusting allegations surrounding the workplace culture, sexual assault allegations, and the current CEO of Activision. In 2021, the Californian Department of Fair Employment and Housing took legal action against Activision for an alleged frat boy culture rife with sexual harassment and discrimination. Only 20% of Activision's employees consisted of women or non-binary people at the time. Women were often paid less when they began at the company and throughout their tenures there, compared to their male colleagues. They were overlooked for promotions and pay rises, considered targets for negative actions such as layoffs more, and rarely held any positions of authority. All the executive positions were held by white men. And we haven't even got to the sexual stuff yet. According to The Guardian, female employees were subjected to a near daily routine of sexual harassment, gender discrimination, objectification, and retaliation. Male employees would often arrive at work hungover, discuss their sexual encounters out in the open, and even joke about rape. What kind of f***ed up person does that? There was a tradition called cube crawling, where men would get drunk during work hours and crawl around on the ground through the office cubicles of female co-workers and engage in inappropriate conduct. Male employees would regularly self-delegate their work to female employees and spend that time playing video games. Lactation rooms would be deliberately used by men as meeting rooms when mothers needed them. Pregnant women were discriminated against, having their medical needs ignored and given negative evaluations for female employees who took maternity leave. One female employee even stated that her manager didn't want to promote her because, quote, he feared she would get pregnant and like being a mum too much. On the occasion that someone would speak out on the issues in the workplace, HR would ignore them. Very rarely would any serious disciplinary action be given out. In fact, due to a lack of confidentiality, complainants would be subjected to retaliation from the perpetrators and their network. They could be given less work on a project, relocated to a different division against their will, or even laid off when the time came. There's much worse stories that were told that I don't want to mention in this video because they are that dark. But as I've said, these are allegations. I'm in absolutely no means qualified to say if they're true. Only the legal system of the respective jurisdiction and those involved could do that. So the CEO catches wind of the situation. What does he do? Well, according to sources, he takes a leaflet from the Guide to Dealing with Criminal Shit from the most sacrosanct of sources, Cardinal George Pell. Yeah, he ignores it, supposedly. Despite all the negative things I've said, it wouldn't be fair for me to just mention them. There are some positive things going on in the gaming industry too. In 2022, Epic Games decided to make hundreds of their temporary employees, particularly the ones responsible for quality assurance, full-time. This allows them to receive benefits mandated by US labour laws. According to a survey conducted by the International Game Developers Association, it has found that the grievances associated with being a game developer, such as unpaid overtime or unjustified discrimination, have been slowly decreasing since 2017. The amount of game developers who have children has been steadily rising, which suggests a slow increase in the confidence of developers to be guaranteed a work-life balance. However, the progress has been slow, as showcased in the most desirable companies to work for. Starting their own business has risen from less to 1% in 2017 to 6% in 2019. Whether the gaming industry is sacrosanct or malevolent is not up to me to decide. I've never personally worked in the gaming industry, and I couldn't program to save my life. But I believe the best way we are to move forward in life is together. We shouldn't be subjecting each other to unrealistic expectations or disgusting behaviour. We are in this together. Only once we realise this will we be able to achieve great things. 4. Games are constrained in the legal system. Let's go on a trip through time. The year is 1999. You can probably see where this is going. The Blues had just lost their bid for a 17th premiership against North. No, this was before then. What do I think this is, a footy video? Come on, I'm not 5. April the 20th. It was another peaceful morning in Littleton, Colorado. It was described by many as just another day. But at 11:19 AM, this normality of life in the United States would be changed forever. 18-year-old Eric Harris and 17-year-old Dylan Klebold, two students who were about to graduate, approached the Columbine High School and began firing into a crowd of students at the west entrance of the school. In total, 15 people were killed, including the perpetrators. The Columbine High School massacre was the deadliest high school shooting in US history. Until 2018. The ripple effect this particular massacre had on American society was almost unheard of at the time. It sent shockwaves not only throughout the United States, but the globe as a whole. And what do people do when a shocking event occurs for seemingly no reason? They try to find answers, no matter how ludicrous they could potentially be. They'll perpetuate myths, such as the idea that Harris and Klebold were bullied, or part of the Trenchcoat Mafia. Ultimately, their motives for the attack are unknown, but one factor that many people pointed out was their avid obsession with the video game Doom. Nowadays, your average liberal American will point to the lax gun regulations as the primary cause of gun violence in the US, but back in 1999, it was a mystery. A common scapegoat used after the massacre is the idea that video games, which are even remotely violent, encourage violent action from their users. As stated earlier, Harris and Klebold were both avid Doom fans. Lawmakers who may or may not have been in bed with the National Rifles Association picked up on this. US Republican Senator for Alabama at the time, Jeff Sessions, was one of the first politicians to state this idea openly in a speech post-Columbine. He stated, "They're able to hook into the internet and play video games that are extraordinarily violent, that cause the blood pressure to rise and the adrenaline level to go up. Games that cause people to be killed and the players to die themselves. It's a very intense experience. They are able to get into internet chat rooms and, if there are no nuts or people with the same mentality in their hometown, hook up with people around the country." Of course, video games weren't the only thing he blamed, but violent culture on platforms such as movies and TV shows were a huge portion of it. He also spent most of this particular speech shitting on gun regulations implemented or were to be implemented by the likes of Bill Clinton. Fast forward 19 years, and the day is Valentine's Day 2018. 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz embarked on a rampage that would become America's worst high school shooting in its history. At 2:19 in the afternoon, he would return to Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, a school which he was previously expelled from. He was wielding a .223 caliber AR-15 semi-automatic rifle, which he had legally purchased. He pulled a fire alarm to cause confusion, and once students and staff exited the classrooms, he opened fire. In total, 17 people were killed and a further 17 were injured. Of course, this atrocity added fuel to the fire that is the eternal gun violence debate in the US. But as we all know, a certain orange-skinned man-child was running the country at the time. In a speech after the massacre, Trump blamed violent video games and movies for the increase in gun violence over the past 2 decades. He stated, "The video games, the movies, the internet stuff is so violent. It's hard to believe that at least a percentage, and maybe it's a small percentage of children, that this doesn't have a negative impact on their thought process. But these things are really violent." He isn't the only Republican to make these kind of statements in recent history. After the El Paso shooting in 2019, House Minority Leader at the time, Kevin McCarthy, blamed video games, calling them dehumanizing and a problem for future generations. He even went so far as to compare crime scenes to some areas in video games. Furthermore, Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patricks believes that the only real factor which has changed since mass shootings have become more commonplace are video games. And before you latte-drinking, Avo-loving Democrat motherfuckers begin gloating, know that your party has also been guilty of similar rhetoric. In the early 90s, Democratic Senators Joseph Lieberman and Herbert Kohl called for a hearing into video game violence. President Bill Clinton asked the federal government to look at how game companies marketed violent games towards children. His wife Hillary even campaigned against video game violence in 2000. California even tried to ban the sale of violent video games to children. Ultimately, this decision was found to be unconstitutional in 2011. Personally, I think both liberals and conservatives in the United States are selfish, narcissistic, individualistic idiots. As a result of the stigma caused from this rhetoric, I've noticed most of the FPS games I've played and seen aren't really that violent. Far Cry 2, 3 and 4. Well, the most I ever get squeamish is when I'm healing myself and it plays an animation of you fixing yourself up. If you shoot an enemy, all you really see is a small red hole where the bullet went. No pools of blood or anything like that. Plus in Far Cry 4, it punishes you for killing civilians and allied soldiers. Trust me, this is a good thing. The Half-Life series? Well, it doesn't have that much blood in it either. You can see the occasional scientist getting eaten by an alien, but they cover up most of the violence by either dragging them through the air vents or completely consuming them. In all these games, I've never used a shotgun and realistically blown an enemy to pieces when aiming for the head or chest. Sometimes it even takes multiple shots to kill them with a shotgun. I'll be the first to admit, this genre of games still has quite the level of violence in it. Personally, I haven't played that many FPS games, so you can take my opinion with a grain of salt if you want. While I do personally agree that violence in video games should be regulated to a degree, trust me, I've been on the darkest corners of Reddit and 4chan. You do not want the violence to be super realistic. I can't help but think there are parties on both mainstream political sides that like to use arguments like this to push their own agendas onto the cultural sections of society. It's the stigma that this causes that contributes to ruining the immersion of video games. You may have certain groups or individuals in video games that are just so ridiculously unrealistic or preach ridiculously unrealistic views, but are put in just so the developers can pander to certain groups of people. You may even have that kind of corporate fake heart-wrenching story designed to advocate for a certain political system or certain ideas or even religious institutions. To me, this ruins the immersion, but they can still be fun just to play for the sake of casually cooling off from a long day's work. I just like being able to take the story seriously. Or is it specifically an Australia thing? From 2013 up until 2022, our government consisted of a coalition between the right-wing Liberal and National parties. We had 3 prime ministers in this period, 2 of them being among the worst in our country's history. Up until 2013, our video games classification system was not up to par with the rest of the world. We had no R18 plus classification. The highest ratings given were MA15 plus, which meant that if a 15-year-old couldn't play it, nobody could. This led to many incidents, such as a ban on GTA 3 in 2001, after immediate outcry due to the nature of the game. Since this incident, video game consumer groups and industry lobbyists have been pressuring the government to make changes to this outdated law. As mentioned before, in 2013, they relented. But the campaign to change the laws was not centred around giving Australian adults the right to play certain video games. No, it was based around the possibility of games potentially being misclassified and ending up in the wrong hands. So instead of creating a new rating, all the R18 Plus edition did was shuffle the MA15 Plus rating 3 years ahead. Although looking at it, apparently it has been in the works since 2012 when Labour was in power. So I don't know why I brought up these two knuckles. Perhaps I just wanted to remind the people of Australia how bad they were. What really is wrong with the legislation? Is the government justified in their actions? In my opinion, they are to an extent, but it does go a bit too far. To see what I mean, let's look at the legislation. The classifications of games are decided by the Australian Classifications Board, which is fair enough, but who appoints the board members? Is it a democratic process? According to their website, it's the Governor-General who appoints board members. You know, the man who is a representative of an outdated system which should honestly just be abolished. But that's talk for another time. The Federal Communications Minister can make recommendations for who should be appointed to the board, and does consult with the state and territories, but it's the Governor-General who is the final arbiter. Games are classified into the following: G for General, PG for Parental Guidance, M for Mature Audiences, MA15+, the newly created R18+, and RC. RC stands for Refused Classification, and in this discussion is the most important of the classifications, because technically the games weren't outright banned, but they were refused classification, which is practically the same thing. A game will be refused classification by the Classifications Board if the following prerequisites are met. The game provides promotion or instructions on committing crimes and pedophilic activities. The game has depictions or descriptions of child sexual abuse or any other inappropriate depictions of children under the age of 18. The game has depictions of violence with a very high degree of impact or cruelty. The game has depictions of sex or sexual activities. And most importantly to this story, the games have depictions and promotions of drug use in a positive manner. It's this last one that has stirred up the most amount of controversy, probably because of all the loud-mouthed meth heads down at Nimbin. These reasons for the RC ratings have led to many video games being refused classification. Some notable games that have been refused classification in the past include DayZ, Fallout 3, Katana Zero, Crusader Kings 3, Blade Runner Enhanced Edition, Genital Jousting, Leisure Suit Larry, f***ing Sludge Life. There are many more that have been refused classification. A fair amount of them, such as Leisure Suit Larry, are justified in my opinion, and some of the ones mentioned, such as Crusader Kings 3, have had their bans overturned. But there is one specific example that stuck in my mind. In March of 2022, the Classifications Board decided in their infinite wisdom to refuse the classification for some unannounced console ports of the video game RimWorld. Why did they do this? Well, in short, there's drugs in RimWorld. But also the game is overpriced. I may have made the second one up, or not. You be the judge. But Mike, didn't RimWorld get released in 2013 without any problems, you're probably asking? Yes, and as a result, the PC version wouldn't be affected by this rating, right? Right? Wrong! Because only 5 days after this news was announced, it would be removed from Steam in Australia. For a game that looks relatively tame, this announcement came as a shock to the gaming community. Luckily for RimWorld fans and the developers, a 4-member panel came to the conclusion that any drugs that are used in the game have a negative impact on the player, revoking the ban in the process. This begs the question, how effective are these so-called bans in reality? Well, in most cases, if a game has refused classification, it only means the hard copy cannot be distributed. Usually, you can still purchase the game online on websites such as Steam, but sometimes, like in the case of RimWorld, they do take it down. I'd say the fact that I, a veteran gamer of almost 2 decades who has lived in Australia my whole life, didn't realise how truly strict the government was about this process, to me proves that this legislation is only so effective. But I'm of the mindset that we must remain vigilant at all times. There are always going to be people who want to push their own agendas onto others. Always be wary of these people and call them out on this. And for those wondering if video games actually cause violence, I did some research. Don't worry, I used actual scientific studies and multiple studies to come to a proper conclusion, but still, I'd do more research if I was you. The studies? Well, they're quite varied, but the general consensus nowadays is leaning towards the idea that video games have a minuscule impact on the behavioural patterns concerned with aggression. A study conducted in 2018 revealed that there was little to no changes in the behavioural patterns between the 3 groups of randomly selected people who were assigned to play either GTA 5, The Sims 3, or nothing at all over a 2-month period. In the Oxford Handbook of Digital Technologies and Mental Health, Jonathan Zachariah Guller and Christopher J. Ferguson further assert this position. However, I wouldn't fully trust this source, as the language sounds quite biased. They don't even properly remember the name of the Isla Vista killer. On the contrary, a study was undertaken in 2019 where 648 Chinese middle school students were given 4 different questionnaires relating to their usage of violent video games, home life, and other factors. This study showed a correlation between violent video game usage and an increase in aggressive behaviour. However, this behaviour also correlated with a less than ideal home life. If you were to ask for my opinion alone, there is one statement from Philip M. Boffey that sticks out to me. Video games have spread widely around the world without driving other countries to the levels of violence in this country. If this is completely the case, which based on my country is most certainly the case, then I believe the problem with violence in the US is more complex than just video games. But ultimately, doing nothing about it, or using such a ludicrous idea as video games alone being the scapegoat to justify inaction on other fronts, does nothing to reduce the violence. 5. Steam is bad. Oh Valve, how I once loved you. You were the creators of some of the finest games of the early 2000s/2010s. The likes of Half-Life, the Portal series, TF2, and even a few prototype games such as The Lab served as the pinnacle of innovation in gaming at the time. Don't even get me started on the effect Steam has had on my childhood. I transitioned from playing cheap, shitty games on the internet and mobile devices to playing some of my favourite PC games of all time. Without Steam, I don't know where I'd be as a gamer. But by f***ing God has Steam become trash over the past few years. I'll be honest, this is more of an opinion, but the biggest problem I have with Steam isn't the functionality of the app, no. It's trying to find a half-decent game that I like. I mean, look at this shit. None of this interests me in the slightest. And these are supposedly the best games that Steam has to offer. Underneath the thin shell of fake chocolate coating, there is an endless core of pure shit. Honestly, the amount of dog shit indie games that somehow make it onto Steam astounds me. And there is one particular genre of game that sticks out to me like a sore thumb the size of the Titanic. Simulators. Here's a challenge for you, and I'm being 100% serious when I'm saying this. Find a driving/flying simulator game, which is not only single player, but also not complete trash. Also, it can't be either Euro Truck Simulator or Microsoft Flight Simulator. Be honest, there's nothing else, is there? Either you have the shitty joke simulator games where the physics are deliberately bad, some stupid anime dating game, or a driving simulator with graphics so bad I wouldn't have even played it on a shitty tablet when I was 5. And don't even get me started on the FIFA/Madden games that are blatantly pay to win. And then there's the porn.
Holy shit! Did you just come in your system?
My god, did I almost relapse. Almost. You know, I genuinely feel bad for any struggling porn addicts out there, because you can find it almost anywhere these days. It's sick how much we sexualize everything. Anyway, enough about my disgust of anything sexual. I don't blame Valve or Steam. Well, I do for the porn. Okay, I'll move on from that. You can only serve what you are supplied. And no matter how good of a chef you are, if you have bad ingredients, like pure shit, then you're only able to cook so much. But the least they can do is try. They seem to be as good at curating as they are creating much anticipated sequels that should have been created years ago. Please just get on with Half-Life 3 already, for f***'s sake. I know there are good games and good developers out there. Well, I hope there are. Point is, get your shit together, Valve. Also, why the f*** did you make it that I can't see how many people found a review unhelpful? That was the precursor to YouTube removing dislikes. Anyway, enough about this point. 6. Games are too easy. Also, game journalists are complete morons. This may seem more like an opinion, but hear me out. Have you noticed how many concessions game developers give you when playing a game? X-ray vision, deliberately dogshit AI, predictable stories, hints and clues everywhere, forced tutorials with short and easy levels, mini-maps, teleportation and quick travel. These features have become all too endemic in video games of new. Let's look at an example of an old game with none of these features, Half-Life 2. I know I'll sound a lot like the YouTube user Worth a Buy here, but he is right about this game. The game has no X-ray vision, no hints or minimap. The closest you get to a minimap is in episode 2 when the mechanic installs a map on your car to find little stashes in the field. In Half-Life 2, you must follow the path, and while it is linear, it is designed to feel like you're actually exploring an open world, and they do a pretty damn good job of it as well. When you come across a problem, the only hints are natural. The best example of this is in Half-Life 2 Episode 1 when you reach the elevator underground in the chapter Low Life. You need to find a source of electricity to power the elevator, so you must follow the wire to the electricity box where you turn the power on. And while Alex does complain about the lack of power, she gives very little in regards to hints. But this isn't the only example in the Half-Life 2 games. WAB gives the example of removing the chocks behind a combine vehicle to disable a force field. It created a phenomenon that we will talk about later called immersion. You know what that is, right? It's when you feel like you're actually in the game and imagining what it would be like. The unknown and difficult are what makes games great. You don't need to know every small detail about how a game works, or what you need to do all the time. Nowadays, it's almost impossible to find a game that doesn't hold your hand one way or another. An example of a game that holds your hand, which I'm most familiar with, is Far Cry 4. Don't get me wrong, I love this game. It's incredibly fun, but there are just some problems with the game that I can't get out of my head. First, when you're in a mission, there will almost always be a yellow dot on the screen to show you where you need to go. While I can see why you might need this, I just wish there was a setting I could use to turn it off. It makes victory seem inevitable, which, let's be honest, it kinda is. But this is only the tip of the putrid iceberg of piss. When you're doing the side quests, the leaders of the resistance, known as the Golden Path, will sing praises to you when you complete the quests. It's like they're constantly watching you, big brother and sister if you may. Perhaps this is part of the reason people think they're so special. Add to that the mini-map where you can just teleport to any base you capture, and the X-ray vision which even if you turn it off in the settings, you can still get either by using the hunter medicine or your camera. You'd think the gaming community wouldn't accept this, that they would be up in arms. And to an extent they are, but why do these developers persist? I blame the gaming journalists. To truly see how dreadful they are, we will look at a game that has had a reputation for being incredibly difficult, Cuphead. Cuphead is a boss fight centric game inspired by the old Walt Disney animations of the 1930s. In order to complete the game, you must beat all the bosses of the Inkwell Isles on regular difficulty to attain their soul contracts for the devil. You can choose to either hand the soul contracts over or fight the devil to free the bosses. Cuphead is a really good game. I enjoy casually playing it from the beginning to the end in just under 2 hours. Yep. I eat Cuphead for breakfast. Or should I say drink. This game is so easy, it's not funny. It's honestly harder to take a shit than to play Cuphead. Anyone who says this game is hard is a noob. The only thing really hard about it is S-ranking Chef Saltbaker with only the pea shooter. And I mean only Chef Saltbaker. But since the narrative is that this game is hard, how did the journalists react? Well, there was this one guy called Dean Takahashi. Yes, I'm bringing this shit back up. I'm exhuming this corpse. Bite me. It's important, okay? So his name is Dean, and he couldn't even get past the jump dash of the tutorial for 5-something minutes, which is absolutely pathetic. I don't expect you to be an MLG gamer who has just won multiple esports awards, but if you're gonna review games, you should at least be somewhat competent at your job. That was just a tutorial for f***'s sake. The instructions were literally on the wall! F*** me. I can understand if it was somebody who'd never touched a video game in their life or hasn't played them in years. But this guy is a games journalist and has been since 1987. You'd think he could at least jump dash. And then you get idiots like Orva and Morrow defending him, saying that game journalists work super hard so they don't have enough time to, you know, do their jobs properly. Here's what he had to say. I just have to note that he says it in that typical libtard, fake news, self-righteous asshole style of writing that is endemic in the media. Wait, hang on a minute. I just noticed something. He is actually a she, and a very hot she. Hang on, we don't do that sleazoid around here. That shows who I think the largest demographic of gamer is. Perhaps Anita Sarkeesian had a point. Oh, I don't know, I haven't seen any of her stuff in years. Anyway, the first point is the old game journalists aren't paid to get good at games argument. She states, it's their job to embed themselves in this industry. So clearly, they can't be trusted as reliable sources of information if they aren't masters at every game on which they work. Obviously, this is one of them obnoxious, sarcastic remarks that even I make from time to time. But personally, I think it's a bit dishonest to suggest all gamers are of this belief. Obviously, the stupid ones and those who haven't thought about it long and hard may believe this, but unlike them, I have. In my opinion, I think deep down they weren't mad at him for being bad at Cuphead. They were mad at him because it appears to be a pathetic attempt to make the game look harder than it actually is. The problem is that idiots like him dictate the gaming narrative, no matter how incompetent they may be at the game. This causes developers to get too cocky or not truly understand what a difficult game looks like. To see what I mean, let's have a quick look at some Cuphead reviews made by journalists. This one's from IGN. You may have gleaned by now that this game is really hard. It's absolutely uncompromising in its difficulty from the outset. Now, I don't know which version of the game you played, but it's certainly not the version I'm playing. No level includes checkpoints. Oh, boo f***ing who. You know what other game has no checkpoints? Geometry Dash. And you don't even get 3 lives in that game. You could hit levels that take hours to beat. I mean, only if you're a f***ing tortoise. As I've said previously, I've taken roughly 2 hours to beat the game in its entirety, give or take. In fact, that was my first major live stream. The link is in the description. Here's a review from PC Mag. While it lacks the stage-heavy mayhem of other games in the genre, Cuphead more than makes up for it with its vicious boss battles. Vicious. Vicious? These bosses are about as vicious as a puppy, with maybe the exception of Chef Saltbaker's first phase. How about GameSpot? What do they have to say about this game?
Everything you've heard about Cuphead is true.
Did you see that? Did you? The voice of
Gaming.
Honestly, anyone who says this game is difficult is, you know what, I'm done. The other big point she makes is the fact that game journalists are overworked and forced to do stuff they don't like. And I think this is a fair point that I probably should have discussed in Reason 3 alongside the game dev companies. But that isn't a complete excuse. In my opinion, I think game journalism should be split into different categories. There should be investigative journalism, like the stuff Dean specialises in, game news journalism, and game reviewers. Obviously, I've never worked in this industry, so I might be wrong, but I think only game reviewers should be able to describe the difficulty of a game in the game journalism industry. And even among game reviewers, they should be separated into different game genres, but we live in the real world, so the feasibility of this idea is something that is probably too difficult. But Mike, why do you care if games are too easy? There's no real life implications, are there? And to that, I'll give you a personal anecdote. It wasn't until I first played games such as Victoria 2 that I truly understood how complicated politics is, and how decisions are not made based on beliefs, but on consequences. It wasn't until I played games such as Half-Life 2 that I began to learn that I need to pay more attention to what my boss says so I can get the job done on my own without hearing it more than once. It wasn't until I played games such as Euro Truck Simulator and Valheim that I learnt how to become a better navigator. If kids are growing up on games that practically play themselves, what problem-solving skills are they learning for the real world? Because if I'm being honest, school didn't teach me jack shit. Well, except for my history classes and DT. Anyway, if you want to play some hard games, I'd suggest the following: Half-Life, and I mean the original Half-Life, not Black Mesa, the COD World at War campaign on the hardest difficulty, and of course, any demon level on Geometry Dash. I'm sure there's plenty more hard games I haven't heard of, but most of them would be old. My final message for this point? Get good, scrubs. It's for your own good. 7. My PC sucks. Okay, this point may be mute for me, but I'm still going to put it out there anyway, for one simple reason. I'm not the only person on planet Earth. There are other people with just as bad, if not worse PCs than I had, though my computer guy may beg to disagree. In a nutshell, my old computer was purchased for me as a Christmas gift by my mother way back in 2016. It did all the things that a computer does when it ages. Applications would crash, programs freeze, and stop responding, but it was November of last year that the hard drive fried. I got it fixed temporarily, but then that hard drive also failed on me because the idiots that fixed it installed the cheapest possible SSD drive. The final straw that made me give up on my PC was when it was possessed by the ghost of Randy Stair. I know you're trying to recruit me into the EGS, don't deny it! Also, Ember's a trash character. Her design was alright, but apart from that, she's just mid. The point is, even when my PC wasn't having many problems, it was a gaming PC, and some of the games that I played on the higher end performed dreadfully. As a result, I always stayed away from the larger, more graphics-intensive games such as the latest CODs, Battlefields, and big games like Red Dead Redemption 2 or Kingdom Come Deliverance. It's a real shame because many of those games seem like a lot of fun. I'll admit, I don't know jack shit about computer hardware, but I do know that if you want your game to be popular, you should at least make it compatible with all levels of device, good or trash. To me, it seems like game development companies are run by spoiled rich kids who run around and brag about that super expensive car or yacht they bought with their daddy's money. But instead of expensive yachts and cars, they brag about having top-end computers and design games with graphics that can only be properly handled by their highest of high-end PCs. They don't care if it doesn't run well on a lower-end machine. To get an idea of how much more demanding games are on PCs nowadays, let's compare some old and new games. Half-Life only requires 96 megabytes of RAM and 4 gigabytes of storage. Its sequel, Half-Life 2, only requires 6 gigabytes of storage and 512 megabytes of RAM. COD 1 and COD 2 only require 128 and 256 megabytes of RAM respectively. Now, let's compare it to a newer game. Star Wars Jedi Survivor. 8 gigabytes of RAM and 155 gigabytes of storage are required. Do you see how this could be problematic for some people? I don't like discussing repeat offenders, but I cannot think of a better example than Paradox Interactive games, particularly EU 4. The game runs well at first, but then slowly it gets slower and slower and slower. I really wanted to get into HOI 4 because World War II is the most interesting conflict in human history, but I couldn't because the game would always slow down past 1939. One time, I was trying to get the African Power achievement in Europa Universalis 4, but I couldn't because the game slowed down after 200 years. I only just managed to get the New Delhi achievement before the game became insufferable. If it was bad for me, a guy with a supposedly high-end machine that many people said was a good machine, then what must it be like for people with shitty laptops or even older PCs? Does Paradox do anything about it? No. They just keep stacking their games with an endless pile of DLC, which in turn just makes the game even slower. Some people would probably use the just argument. Just buy/build a better PC that can handle said games. And I have. But what about those who can't afford to build or buy a better computer? What do they do? 8. The immersion is dead. You know the old saying, ignorance is bliss? Well, that's a load of horse shit. But there is one quote by magician Artie Wind that struck a chord with me when I first heard it. It goes along the lines of,
once I show you how it's done, you can't unknow it.
when you're a kid and you discover something new, it perplexes you. It fills your mind with many imaginative scenarios. You wonder how it works or how you can change it. Sometimes the desire for knowledge goes so far, you desperately try to pry it out of its creators or anyone else in the know. Whether or not these people give you that knowledge, it will slowly come to you as you grow older. Slowly but surely, the mystery of life fades away like a fog in the morning. And once that mystery is gone, what are you left with? After all, once you know how a trick works, you can't unknow it. The same principle can be applied to gaming. The best example of this is Minecraft. Any veteran gamers remember the first time they ever played Minecraft? I'm not talking about the newer versions of Minecraft, especially not after Mojang was bought by Microsoft. Can you remember when you spawned into a world for the first time? It was a special feeling. It was a feeling of mystery, of wondering what lay in store for you as you made your way around. What biomes could there be? What animals could I interact with? What kind of structures can I find in this big bad world? What dangers lurk in the dark? I'm sure we all remember our first attempts at cutting down a tree. But as we grew older, we gained all the knowledge we needed to successfully play the game. And no matter how many updates they added, we could see the same old tricks being applied time and time again. Then I started noticing some things. I noticed mobs spawning and despawning at random. I noticed chunks not loading or scenes not blending in well. I noticed things that just wouldn't make sense in the real world. It's these glitches, and sometimes intentional features, that ruin games. I briefly mentioned immersion in a previous point, but immersion isn't just the feeling of it being real. It's the desire for you to have that feeling too. When I'm immersed, I want it to be as realistic as possible, all while still having some fantasy elements. In the case of Minecraft, I want to feel like I'm living on the edge, in a brave new world filled to the brim with danger and opportunity. I want to feel the need to run away and hide from monsters, not just to slaughter them by the thousands and farm them for their resources. It's not just Minecraft, or even the sandbox genre in general that's lost the immersion factor. FPS games have lost it too. Not only have they been dumbed down to an extreme that is flat out unrealistic, but they have revealed some of their graphical tricks to save space. I remember watching a video where it showed the full 360 view of an FPS game. Only the assets that were in the player's field of view were loaded. I would also like to point out some of the more annoying immersion breakers that I've noticed over the years. Don't you just hate it when you come across a random door in a game and you just can't open it? I'm not talking about puzzle doors or anything. I mean just random doors that won't open. I want to be able to explore, goddammit! Then you decide to no-clip out of curiosity, and there's nothing in there anyway. Why have that door there in the first place? Aesthetics? It's just stupid. Some others include units or mobs spawning in certain places that they aren't supposed to. And this is just single player. On multiplayer, it's like people have made it a mission to ruin the immersion. Do they think they're being funny? No. Let's wait until the next point to talk about them. All in all, the immersion in gaming is dead. Some say it's the inevitability of growing up and learning more about life. Others will say it's because of the decline in quality of games being produced. In my opinion, I think it's a little bit of both. But one thing's for certain, very rarely do I ever get immersed in games anymore. And taking the first point of this video into consideration, it's a prime recipe for lost interest. 9. Gamers are idiots. I know this point is probably quite counterproductive considering I'm trying to make money off these videos, and in order to do that, I must appease you guys, right? Well, those sort of fans of me have most likely ascended above the pit of degeneracy, so this doesn't apply to you. Also, I'm quite the hermit nowadays, so this is probably a bit dated. Therefore, I think this point is probably my weakest. This point is going to be more about adopting a better mindset in the end, rather than just things I hate about gamers. If we adopt a better mindset together, we can work towards receiving better quality games from developers. That being said, I can't stand gaming culture these days. There's many reasons for it, but I'll just point out some mindset problems I have observed in some of the groups I've been a part of. From late 2021 up until mid 2022, I was part of a local gaming server for my region. It was a somewhat active server with approximately 20 to 30 people in it. My god, were some of the members arrogant pricks. They were mostly arrogant nerds, who weren't even that smart, by the way, who thought they were king shit just because they read some philosophy books and aroma booze. In fact, I had one f***wit give me the whole, "I have received your friend request, I graciously accept," bullshit, like he was some sort of celebrity or I was just some sort of job seeker. Long story short, I left the server after getting into an argument with the owner because apparently watching a movie with your girlfriend was justification for spontaneously abandoning our plans that we had had for over a f***ing week. Not that I haven't let go or anything. I'm just recapping. The point of the story is, the observation I've made is that a huge portion of gamers, and even nerds in general, have become really arrogant and self-righteous. It's like some sort of psychotic pleasure they take in the thought of being smarter than you just because they know how to play Magic the Gathering. I suppose they must be compensating for something.
Do you think maybe he's compensating for something?
And these were my interactions as a man. I can't even begin to imagine what female gamers have had to go through over the years. I've read many stories on Reddit where girls just turn off their mics when in multiplayer sessions so they don't get harassed by horny guys. In fact, I've watched some YouTube videos where a woman plays multiplayer games and the way these guys act, honestly.
Does it grip?
Is it bubblegum pink?
Ugly fat.
Your ass wants attention, bro.
If this is all true, do you guys wonder why you can't get laid? In fact, while I was discussing Orvarin's article, I read a part where she talks about some negative experiences with gamers and game developers. Examples include being spawn camped, talked, and having a mouse snatched from her and being berated for her supposed incompetence. In fact, reading that made me feel really bad for her, so I wanted to apologise. If you're watching this, Orvarin, I'm sorry for calling you an idiot and insulting your writing method. You made some good points in the article. There was just one idiotic one that I wanted to cover. I understand if you're mad at me though. One more point I want to cover in regards to mindset is the idea of accepting mediocrity. This is somewhat redundant considering how gamers stood up to EA in the Star Wars Battlefront 2 controversy, but I believe a lot of people, especially kids, tend to accept some of the shittier features in games such as microtransactions and glitchy graphics. The problem with accepting mediocrity, not only in gaming, but society in general, is that those who are in control will try to slowly make things worse and worse. We will begin with great games such as Prey, Terraria, Minecraft, etc. Then after a while we end up with nothing but anime graphic novels that people somehow try to pass off as games. Honestly, what is with this anime obsession? I don't understand. Perhaps I should try one of these games. Stay tuned on my second channel. The point is, we should never accept mediocrity. They'll try using arguments such as, we need to implement these features to survive as a company, or the age-old, what about the kids in Africa argument. But these arguments have no real merit. We should be improving the lives of everybody, no matter where they live. Don't fall for their bullshit. Don't be a sycophant to these gaming companies because nobody is above releasing subpar content. Just look at Star Wars Jedi Survivor from EA. Worth a Buy spent 14.5 hours just downloading a patch and trying to get it to work. 10. The games I want to play are multiplayer only. If you've watched any of my nature films before, you'd know, or at least suspect, that I live in the sticks. For any Yankees watching this, that means the middle of nowhere. What's the prime consequence of living so far out of town? My internet is absolute shit. Wonder why there's so much noise from my first few live streams? It's because I had to go to my friend's house to do it, because they actually live in town. Why is this relevant, Mike? You may be asking. What are you getting at here? Well, my dear viewer, I lived in my current residence since late 2012, probably before many of you were born, though considering the sensitive nature of this video, I'd say most of you are my age or older. As a result of this shitty Australian internet, I've been unable to play online multiplayer games without either having severe lag or the internet just dropping out entirely. Sometimes I wonder if I could have been a professional esports player if it wasn't for the shitty internet that I've had to put up with. In hindsight, I'm glad I didn't. I'd probably be a fat slob who would never clean up my room after myself and have my mother do everything for me. The point is, there are many games that I would love to have played, but are multiplayer exclusive. Think the likes of War Thunder, DCS, PUBG, Rust, Among Us, Fortnite. Oh, who am I kidding? Fortnite's for little children.
We got a number 1 victory royale, yeah, Fortnite, we about to get down. Get down, 10 kills on the board right now.
So many fun looking games I've missed out on because they're multiplayer only. Why do devs make games like this? My first theory is that they're just too lazy to program AI that actually has a shred of intelligence, and too creatively inept to come up with a half-decent story. The second theory is more sinister. According to Michael Wendham of Top Tens, EA made the statement in 2010 that single-player experiences are becoming, quote, obsolete. They backed this up in 2017 when they closed Visceral Game Studios, the creators of the Dead Space series. Their CEO stated that people don't care about single-player anymore. Perhaps they would if you wits would actually put effort into your single-player games. Quite frankly, this mindset is discriminatory to those like myself who live in the countryside and are forced to live with internet. He also hinted at the fact that multiplayer games are better opportunities for implementing microtransactions. Look, enough said about that point. Point is, I'm never purchasing an EA game in my life again. F you, EA. If games are destined to be multiplayer exclusive, that will be justification enough for me to quit gaming in its entirety. I can't be bothered dealing with dog shit internet and a toxic gaming culture that I previously mentioned. Luckily, I don't think this will be the case. I don't have a problem with multiplayer personally, just games that are multiplayer only. I think there will always be a market for single player games, no matter how small it may be. And looking back in hindsight, I'm glad I never played the likes of War Thunder, considering the drama that has been happening recently. Quite frankly, I think it would have been a big waste of time for me to play that game. Or perhaps it's just a me problem. Perhaps I'm too old. Perhaps I should be in the office writing pointless reports, or in the factory packing boxes and bags full of macadamia nuts. Perhaps I'm an old man trapped in a young man's body, inoculated by the games of old which I grew up playing and loving. Perhaps my preferences are dated and unjust. I have been living away from the major hubs of the world for almost my entire life after all. There has to be a reason why these games are so popular. Maybe it's just a me problem. Or perhaps I'm right about all this. Maybe the gaming industry has been truly ruined, wringed dry of any and all substance by these companies like a wet towel. I admit, I could be wrong, and personally, I don't mind being wrong about some of these reasons. A lot of them are my opinions after all. But there is one thing I'm definitely right about. I'm right about the way I feel, and I feel like I've lost interest in gaming. On a lighter note, this revelation has led me towards a more fulfilling path. The path of manual labour. I never would have thought this when I was younger, but as I began working a proper manual labour job, I realised this kind of work is my gate and key to happiness. When you're doing a manual labour job, all you really focus on is getting the job done in the moment. You don't worry about the future or what people think about you. You just get exercise. I much prefer manual labour over going to the gym because at least there's some incentive apart from just muscle gains. Point is, I always jump to the chance to work with my father on the property nowadays. I almost use it as an excuse to get off my computer. And while my father may be a bit condescending at times, I've grown to really enjoy working with him. If you're watching this, Dad, and you've somehow gotten this far, I love you. And the blues will get better soon, I'm sure of it. But there is one problem if what I say about gaming is true. I did a poll a while back and discovered that all of my viewers would like me to be a gaming channel. If that is to say the case, I'll need to have some interest in gaming. So what's the plan? Well, I still plan on doing gaming stuff, but for now I have some ideas for games such as Terraria and Stardew Valley, which are a bit older, but I still enjoy to a degree. I will also look for some other games such as Red Dead Redemption 2 or Kingdom Come Deliverance that I could enjoy now that my PC is better. I also want to live stream more and better, but that would depend on a number of factors. I would also like to interact with my viewers more and even get into animation. I have a very special animation project that I might be working on for the long-term future. If you're still here after 1.5 hours of me rambling on about what I don't like about the gaming industry, then thank you very much for watching this. I put a huge amount of effort into this video, so don't forget to give it a like, leave a comment with your opinions or some facts that could counter my observations, share the hell out of the video, and most importantly, subscribe with the notifications on. Thank you. And as for a second hint, here it is. I set sail on the oceans abroad in early 2023. It has been a giant journey.